Continuing the conversation with Joe, Darwin's hamster, who I really do like and respect, one of my favorite YouTube personalities. um, I don't think we disagree. I mean, we disagree, but I mean, I don't think ultimately we will be disagreeing. So I think it's more of a semantic argument than a real argument. But there might be something here. There might be something worth pursuing. I guess the first thing I'd say is that we sort of already fell into a trap built by culture when we use the word depression, because the culture automatically establishes this thing. You did use the word normal, and it's sort of a tricky thing because one could argue that normal has no credibility. Normal is just a product of cultural evolution, and it's easy to argue that the survivors of the fittest kind of thing in that scenario might have been people that were horribly insensitive, people that might have been a little cruel and callous, because that's the only kind of person that could survive our heritage. And so that normal might be a little more aggressive than right or appropriate. But let's try to deal with those words. I think there's no point in going any further than the word delusional. I mean, if you want to declare somebody wrong, find the delusion, find the improper thought, the improper premise that might be the foundation for the emotional reaction, whether it's positive or negative. If it's a delusion, it breaks anything built on top of it. So I think we could agree with that. So whether you're optimistic because you have a delusion of God, or whether you're pessimistic because you have a delusion of hopelessness, they're both wrong. They're both perspectives, and they can both be very dangerous. I mean, I think it's wrong to imply that the fact that you might be self-destructive through depression is any more dangerous than the person who is capable of initiating a war, or keeps investing in a society that doesn't work, or something that's incredibly broken, or has too many children they can't take care of because they were so optimistic and so certain that their life and life itself makes sense. So I think delusions can be bothersome, whether they lead you to half empty thinking or half full thinking. That's where the root of the problem is in inaccurate perceptions, and we probably should stop there when it comes to the judgments we make, because I think the argument can be made that positive thinking is as potentially dangerous as negative thinking, certainly on the broader scale. I mean, to the individual, it's probably better to be a positive thinker, but to the world, that probably creates the cannibals that we see operating and functioning in our society. So there's a danger in that too. I mean, that's probably enough said. We could probably stop right there, right? And say, okay, let's agree to be anti-delusion rather than anti-depression. But let's go through it a little bit further, because you did use words that are just so dangerous, in my opinion, like beauty. There's lots of beauty in the world, kind of a statement, and it's all sorry, but yeah, I don't know how you can defend a perception of beauty. I mean, it's arbitrary nonsense. It's it doesn't mean anything. I mean, beyond the fact that you experience it, it's I don't want to call it delusional, but that's all it really is, isn't it? I mean, isn't it just an artificial, contrived perception of value, beauty? I mean, we don't say that was a beautiful solution to the world crisis. I mean, beauty is always something, this subjective thing where something gives you a feeling, or is desirous or attractive. I mean, I had to, it's kind of ironic, but I mean, I had two different magazines had the same picture in them, and I had them in two different rooms, and just so obviously I defined this as beautiful. For me, from my standard, this was the most beautiful picture in the catalogs. And it just coincidentally, turned up to be the same person, the same image. But what is that made out of? I mean, that's completely a hormonal male genetic response, a definition of value, a definition of valuable cheese that's completely contrived within me. It has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with real value. It's complete bullshit. And yes, it could motivate the hell out of me. It can inspire me to want, desire, and chase. But is any of that is built on this presumption of value, this delusion, personal delusion of value? Does that mean anything? Is that constructive behavior? I mean, I would argue that probably not. It's probably just cheese chasing, tail chasing. It's just, that's been defined as satisfaction and comfort. Therefore, I will chase it. I mean, it's really stupid. All right, so let's get on to another word used was accomplishment, and that's sort of productive, I think, even came up a little. You're going to be more productive if you have a positive mental attitude. But that's, again, dangerous because your productivity is completely connected to what you have defined as valuable. And again, if the values are based on just a personal illusion of value, your productivity is going to be limited. And let's take a more realistic example. You could see value in helping hungry people. You could say, okay, it makes sense, I'll feed the poor. And so you go somewhere, you feed the poor, and then you find out a year later that instead of one poor person, now there's two poor persons. And then the year after that, there's four poor persons. And you're saying, well, look, I'm feeding the poor, and I got more poor. So what the hell's happening here? Something's broken. I mean, my good work is turning into shit somehow. Somehow my good work is futile because I'm making more poor people. So we could say that there's this point where, even though there's things to do and things you might think were productive, maybe they're not productive because maybe it's not a problem you can solve. Maybe the situation is truly hopeless. Maybe hopelessness isn't a delusion. Maybe it isn't wrong thinking. So my only argument to you is this is really, it gets a little complicated, especially when we have this horribly poor verbiage to work within, this traditional language to operate within these confines, and where tradition wants to always validate itself, and where there's a strong bias to validate life, the whole religion thing. I mean, there's a really, really strong bias to validate existence as being sensible and purposeful, just surviving. I mean, the poor have lived, the press have lived on what might be described as the false hope of the savior, for a long, long time. And I would argue that that's really destructive because it keeps perpetuating an existence, a mindset that can't function. That's not going to provide for itself. It's going to be self-destructive. Our culture is self-destructive. Our culture is clinically depressed. It's clinically deluded. The individuals within it should be pretty depressed about that. Pretty shit. This is a pretty hopeless situation because even doing good, it's like, look, I could go out and do good. I could save whales, right? This is a scenario. This is a real world scenario. I could say, I want to save the poor little whales. But realistically, you're fucked, because if you save the whales, somebody else is going to turn them into a farm animal with no fucking rights. A farm animal doesn't get killed the right way, that has no rights. And so you create even the worst case scenario, an animal that has no fucking rights. And so, life is just more complicated than this, positive thinking kind of notion and negative thinking notion. accurate thinking. And that's what's going to make this argument tough, because and the bottom line is, as soon as you open this can of worms, that's where you have to head. You have to head to a description of what is delusional and what is not delusional. It's really not about what is, positive or negative. It's about the truth. Right, I have a couple extra seconds. I just think you ought to unblock Laura Layla. I'm the last person should be talking about unblocking somebody, but really, she'd probably be worth it. And so, block her for a day or two, but get over it. And all in all, she's always going to be worth the trouble. Okay, I probably should have said periodic irritation rather than trouble. Thank you very much.